The clerk slid my husband's folded flag back across the counter like a returned package and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "No one here cares who your husband was." 20 minutes. That was all the distance between that sentence and the three black trucks that would stop at the curb on Cedar Point Boulevard, doors opening before the engines had finished dying. The woman who said it did not know that the man my husband once carried out of a burning vehicle was still alive, still in uniform, still answering somewhere, to a name only Raymond ever used for him. I did not tell her. I have never been a loud woman. I don't get loud. I get the date right. My name is Eleanor Boyd. I am 67, and for 30 years I kept payroll for the Onslow County School District. Teacher salaries, bus driver overtime, substitute hours logged in pencil, erased, logged again. I can find one wrong digit in a column of 400, the way you would notice a stranger walk into a quiet room. It is not a gift. It is a habit 30 years deep, and that morning it was about the only thing left in my life that still worked the way it always had. The Onslow County Veterans Benefits Office sits on Cedar Point Boulevard in Swansboro, North Carolina, in a low brick building the color of weak coffee, folding chairs along one wall, a vending machine, and a coffee maker with a paper sign taped over the slot that had read out of order since before Raymond got sick. We are 20 minutes up Highway 24 from Camp Lejeune here, which means half the men in those folding chairs had worn the uniform, and most of the other half had been married to someone who did. This is Marine country. Everyone in that room understood a folded flag. That is part of what made the sentence land the way it did. I had driven over with the flag case belted into the passenger seat, the way I used to belt in a casserole so it would not slide on the turns out of our road. It seemed only right. Raymond rode shotgun for 41 years. I was not about to set him in the trunk now. I took a number from the red dispenser by the door, the way you do at a deli counter, the way you apparently do for a thing a man bled for. 41. They were on 19 when I sat down, so I waited. I watched a man with a cane and a Vietnam ball cap get sent home for a different form. I watched a young wife with a baby on her hip get handed a date in October. I drank nothing because the machine had been broken a year and a half, and I had stopped expecting small mercies from a building like that one. 3 hours. I have waited longer for less. By the time my number came up, it was nearly 11, and the supervisor herself had come out to work the front counter. Her name was Brenda Coyle. Reading glasses on a beaded chain, a cardigan the color of a bruise, and the particular calm of a woman who has decided how a conversation will end before it begins. I set Raymond's flag case on the counter between us, glass side up, the way you set down something you love. I told her I had come about my husband's survivor pension. The claim had been denied by letter 3 weeks before, and I wanted to know why. She typed the number off my paperwork without looking up. The screen did something she did not like. She typed it again. "It's erroring," she said, as if that were a whole answer. "The system won't pull it." I had the denial letter in my hand, the claim number printed across the top, and beneath it the received stamp the office had pressed onto my application the day I filed. I looked at that stamp while she typed. The date read March the 3rd. I had filed in person on March the 30th. I remembered the day exactly, because it was the first morning I had made myself leave the house after the funeral. "The received date is wrong," I said. Quietly. "You have it as the 3rd. I filed on the 30th. The digits are turned around." She looked at me then for the first time. Not at the stamp. At me. A gray-haired woman in a church cardigan holding a flag like a casserole dish. "Ma'am, the date in the system is the date we received it. The stamp on my own copy says otherwise. Then your copy is wrong." She slid the letter back toward me. "These claims have windows. Filing windows. Appeal windows. If it wasn't in on time, there is nothing here for you. I made an appointment, I said. Back in April, this office canceled it twice. I kept the letters. Then you understand we're behind. She almost smiled. Everybody's husband served, ma'am. That's the whole town. You are not the only widow who walked in here today thinking her paperwork was special. I did not raise my voice. I told her my husband had served 30 years, that he had earned this, that the flag in front of her had been folded over his coffin by men who stood at attention while the rain came down sideways. I said his name, Raymond Boyd. In that room, in that town, I thought the name might land somewhere. That was when she slid the flag case back across the counter, like a returned package, and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that no one there cared who my husband was. The room went quiet. Not the polite kind, the other kind. An old man 2 chairs down lowered his newspaper. A young Marine by the window turned his head and kept it turned. Brenda Coyle noticed none of it. Some people cannot feel a room turn against them. She was one of them. I have been to a great many funerals. I have folded a flag into that hard triangle with my own hands and felt the cotton give at each corner. So I knew exactly what she had pushed back across the counter, and I understood that she did not. I laid my hand flat on the glass and left it there. I said nothing. People mistake quiet for nothing. They are wrong, but I gave up correcting them a long time ago. Raymond had been gone 5 weeks. The doctors had a long word for what took him, though near the end it stopped mattering what they called it. I had retired early to nurse him, traded payroll ledgers for a hospital bed in the front room, and a chart of medicines I kept the way I once kept the district's books. The right dose at the right hour, written down, initialed. I got the dates right for him to the very last one. It was the last useful thing I knew how to do for the man. He was a quiet one, too. People took it for shyness, and they were wrong, the way people usually are about quiet men. He had been a gunnery sergeant, then more than that, though he never wore a word of it on his sleeve at the Piggly Wiggly. He coached Little League 11 seasons. He fixed neighbors' mowers and would not take $1 for it. Once a year, on a night he never named out loud, he would sit out on the porch past midnight with a single glass of bourbon he barely touched. And in the morning his eyes would be red and he would say nothing, and I would let him keep it. 41 years teaches you which silences to leave alone. In my handbag, sealed inside a freezer bag against the coastal damp, was an envelope Raymond had pressed into my hands 8 days before he passed. His handwriting on the front had gone shaky by then, but I could still read it. To the boy from the ridge. He made me promise 2 things: that I would not open it, and that if anyone ever fought the pension, I would see that it reached the man it was meant for. I did not know who the boy from the ridge was. Raymond never told me, and across all those years I had learned not to lean on the doors he kept shut. There were only a few. That was one of them. At home, in a shadow box he never got around to hanging, there was a pale blue ribbon I had not brought with me. I did not think a widow should have to carry such a thing into a county office to be treated like a person. I still don't. Brenda Coyle was still talking. She had pulled up another screen and was reading me the language of the denial in the flat voice people save for terms and conditions. Failure to file within the prescribed period. Determination final. Appeal period expired. Each phrase landed and she reached for the next, stapling my morning shut. The determination was made back in the spring, Mrs. Boyd. It's signed, it's dated, it's closed. She slid a printed page across to me. You're welcome to a copy for your records. I looked at the date typed on that determination. Then I looked back at the received stamp. And something 30 years deep in me went very still and very awake. The way it used to when two figures that should have matched did not. A signed determination. A filing date turned backward by 27 days. One of those things was true. The other one had been made to look true. A younger clerk appeared at Brenda's shoulder, the way staff do when a supervisor wants a problem to become somebody else's. He had a lanyard and a kind, useless face. "Ma'am, let me walk you out. We've got a full house today." His hand hovered near my elbow without quite landing. He meant well. That is its own kind of insult. The gentle hands that steer you toward the door so the line can keep moving. I picked the flag case up myself. I did not need help carrying my husband. I had carried him for 2 years. The old man with the newspaper caught my eye as I turned. He lifted 2 fingers off the armrest, the smallest salute a man can manage from a folding chair, and set them back down. Nobody else saw it. I did. But I did not leave the building. I sat down in the last folding chair beside the door, set the flag in my lap, and took out the small notebook I still carry out of habit. I wrote the date printed on the determination. I wrote the date on the received stamp. I wrote the time, 6 minutes past 11 in the morning, and the name off the cardigan, Brenda Coyle, supervisor. I do not get loud. I get the date right. What I did not know, sitting in that hard plastic chair while the lobby filled and emptied around me, was that 3 weeks earlier, the very morning the denial letter came, I had already done one quiet thing. I had mailed a padded envelope, certified, the receipt still folded in my wallet. Inside it, copies of Raymond's papers and a name he had written out for me on a slip in that same shaking hand, with an address in Virginia I did not recognize and did not question. I had sent it because he asked me to, not because I believed a single thing would ever come of it. I was wrong about that, the way Brenda Coyle was wrong about the date, and I was about to learn exactly how wrong in front of every soul in that room. The letter that had put me in that chair came 3 weeks before, on a Tuesday, in one of those thin envelopes with a window cut in the front. My name showed through the window crooked, half of it lost behind the fold. I carried it up from the box at the end of our road and set it on the kitchen table and let it sit through a whole cup of coffee before I opened it. Light envelopes carry the heaviest words. 30 years of opening the district's mail had taught me at least that much. Raymond's chair was still pulled out from the table the way he had left it. I had not been able to make myself push it back in. So I opened the letter beside his empty chair and read the word denied near the top, in bold, the way they bold a thing they want you to stop reading after, and then I read the rest, the way I have read everything my whole life, slowly, with a pencil in my hand, looking for the place where the numbers stop telling the truth. My husband kept his papers the way I kept the district's books, a green accordion folder gone soft at the corners from 40 years of being handled, every document in its own slot, every copy dated in his small square hand. He had shown me where it lived, in the bottom drawer of the bureau, the way a man shows you where the water shutoff is, for the day you will need it and he will not be there to be asked. I carried the whole folder to the kitchen table and laid the papers out across it the way I used to lay out a payroll run when one figure would not reconcile, edge to edge, in the light, and I went looking. It did not take long. It never does, once you know what a wrong number looks like from across a room. The office's letter said my claim had been received on the 3rd of March. My own stamped copy, the one the girl at the front had pressed the ink onto while I stood right there watching her do it, said the 30th. 3003. A single digit turned around. The easiest lie in the world to tell, and the easiest one in the world for me to catch, because catching exactly that, and nothing grander than that, had been my entire working life. But it was the next thing that made me set the pencil down on the table and fold my hands. On the 3rd of March, my husband was still alive. He was in the hospital bed we had put up in the front room, by the window, where he could watch the dogwood that he had planted the year our daughter was born. On the 3rd of March, I was still measuring his medicine into the little paper cups and writing down the hour on the chart and initialing it, the way I had initialed 40 years of ledgers. You cannot file for a widow's pension while your husband is still breathing in the next room. There is no such thing as a survivor while the man you would be surviving is still holding onto your hand with what strength he has left. The date that office had sitting in its system was not merely wrong. It was impossible. It described a morning that could not have happened, a widow who did not yet exist. A mistake is a random thing. It falls anywhere. It has no opinion about where it lands, but this date had not fallen anywhere. It had been moved carefully to the one square on the calendar where my claim would look late, a square on which my husband was not yet gone. A true mistake does not pick a direction and walk in it. This one had a direction. I sat at that table a long while with that understanding settling over me, and I did not care for the shape of it at all. That was the night I took Raymond's sealed envelope out of my handbag again and held it under the kitchen light, the way you hold a checkup to see the watermark. He had pressed it into my hands 8 days before he passed, on one of the afternoons when his mind came back clear and whole, the way the tide comes back. He had me sit on the edge of the bed, and he closed both of his hands around mine, hands gone light as paper by then, and he made me promise the two things: not to open it, and to see that it reached the man it was meant for, if anyone ever fought the pension. To the boy from the ridge, it said on the front, in handwriting that climbed uphill across the paper, because his hand would no longer hold a level line. I asked him, as gently as I knew how, who the boy from the ridge was. He looked at the window a long time. Then he said, "That is a man who owes me nothing in this world, and that is exactly the reason he will come." And he closed his eyes, and I let the door stay shut, the way I had learned across 41 years to let Raymond's few shut doors stay shut. There were only ever a handful of them. I never once forced a single one. I did not know the name behind that errand. There was a name written out on a separate slip in that same climbing hand, and under it an address in a town in Virginia I had never once heard cross his lips in all our years together. I did not recognize it. I did not question it. A dying man does not spend his last clear afternoons on things that do not matter, and I was not about to be the one to waste them for him. So 3 weeks ago, on the very morning that denial letter came, before I drove anywhere, before I sat down in any folding chair, I did one quiet thing at that kitchen table. I made copies of all of it: Raymond's record, his orders, the citation he never hung on any wall, my stamped copy with the true date pressed into it, their letter with the false one printed across the top. I made 2 sets. One I sent to a federal office I found listed under the people who take complaints about how these claims are handled, the inspector's office, the place where a thing like mine goes to wait its turn in a tall and patient pile. And the second set, with Raymond's sealed letter laid on top of it the way you would lay a stone on a grave, I sent to that town in Virginia. I drove both of them down to the post office on Main Street here in Swansboro, the little one by the hardware store, and I sent them certified, with the small green cards that come traveling back to you carrying a stranger's signature, so that no soul could ever stand at a counter and tell me the thing had never arrived. I still have the 2 receipts folded in my wallet. I paid the woman $11.40, and she said she was sorry for my loss, because in a town this size everyone already knew, and I drove home, and I did not expect one single thing to come of any of it. I set that down plainly because of everything that came after. I did not mail those envelopes believing they would save me. I mailed them because a dying man had asked me to, and because a promise is a date as well. It comes due. You keep it on the day it falls, not on the day that happens to suit you. So I kept his. What I did not know, could not have known, standing at my own kitchen sink, licking the flap of an envelope bound for a town I had never seen, was that the better part of 400 miles north of me, that same envelope was going to come to rest on one particular desk, and that a man there was going to turn it over in his hands and read 3 words written in a hand he had not laid eyes on in 30 years and go very still. Still, in a way, the people standing around him that morning told me later they had never once seen the man go still. Not in a war, not in a hearing room, not in front of anything this world had ever put in front of him. I did not know that yet. I knew the postage. I knew 3 weeks would pass between that envelope leaving my fingers and the morning it would walk everything it carried straight up to my counter, and I spent every one of those days certain that nothing at all was on its way. Because in those 3 weeks, I tried the ordinary way first. I am not a woman who reaches for a federal office before she has stood at the front counter and asked plainly. I telephoned the Onslow County Veterans Benefits Office 4 separate times. The first time, I was told the file was under review. The second time, I was told there was no record of any file at all. The third time, a young man set me on hold for 40 minutes by the kitchen clock, and then the line simply went dead, the way they do. The fourth time, I asked for the supervisor by her name, because by then I had it, Brenda Coyle, and she came onto the line and told me, in the very same flat voice she would use to my face 3 weeks on, that the claim number was erroring in the system, and there was nothing she could pull. Erroring. She set the word down like a wall across a road. And here is the thing, a person who has kept books for 30 years knows in her bones that other people do not. A number does not error all on its own, over and over, on one woman's claim and on no other, for 3 weeks running. The machine does not single out one widow's file and lose it 4 separate times by accident. Somebody has to reach in and put a hold on it. Somebody has to flag it by hand and keep it flagged. A system left alone makes its mistakes in every direction at once. It loses the early file and the late one, the big claim and the small, all the same, with no favorites. What was happening to me only ever ran the one way. And when every single error in a column leans the same direction, you are no longer looking at error. I knew that the way I knew my own name. You are looking at a hand resting on the scale. I did not yet know whose hand it was, or what it was so afraid of, or what kept it pressing down so steadily on one gray-haired woman from out past the bridge. I only knew the lean of it, and I knew that whatever Brenda Coyle was guarding behind my husband's buried claim, she had decided it was worth more to her than a folded flag and a widow's plain word across a counter. That was the part I could not yet see the bottom of, and I have spent my life able to see the bottom of most things. So that is the whole of how I came to be sitting in the last folding chair beside the door at 6 minutes past 11 in the morning, the flag case resting across my knees, the little notebook open in my hand, and 3 weeks of swallowed answers stacked up behind me. I had written down the 2 dates, the true one and the false one. I had written down her name and her title underneath it. I had finished, and I had set the pencil down inside the spiral, and I had no more notion than the chair I sat in of what was already turning off the highway toward that low brick building. Then the light along the front windows changed. It was a small thing. The kind of small thing that 30 years of sitting quiet in rooms full of other people's numbers, teaches you to feel a half second before you understand it. The long panes of glass at the front of the building went dark in three tall shapes, one behind the other, the way a window goes dark when something large rolls up to the curb and stops, and then a second something, and then a third, drawn up close behind it. Out on Cedar Point Boulevard, three sets of doors swung open very nearly at once, before the engines had even finished dying down to quiet. The young Marine over by the window was the first one in that whole room to turn his head. I watched his back go straight before either of us yet knew the reason why. The young man through the door first was not the one everyone would end up standing for. He came into that lobby in a dark suit, cut close to him, a coiled wire running up out of his collar and behind his ear, and he moved the way a draft moves into a house, low and fast and already reading every corner of the room before the rest of us had finished turning toward the sound of the latch. He held the door open with one arm. He did not look at me. He looked at the hallway behind the counter, and at the exits, and at the ceiling, and at the hands of every man in every folding chair, and then he gave a small nod to the daylight standing behind him, and the daylight came inside. Two more of them, the same kind. And then the uniform. I was married to the Marine Corps for 41 years, and I had long since learned the difference between a uniform a man wears and a uniform that wears the man. This was the first kind. He came through the doors of that little office on Cedar Point Boulevard without any hurry at all. A tall man going gray at the temples, his cover tucked under his arm, and the coastal morning came in off the boulevard with him and caught the front of him in the light. And that is the moment the room began to understand what it was looking at. It was the shoulders. It was what sat on the shoulders. 4 of them in a row. 4 silver stars. More weight than most of the men in that building had ever once seen standing in a doorway in the whole of their lives. I heard the newspaper hit the floor. The man who had given me the 2-finger salute from his folding chair was already on his feet. He had not decided to stand. You could see that plain as anything. His body had stood him up a full second before his mind had finished the thought. The paper sliding off his knee and folding itself open across the linoleum, and his old hand was already coming up flat and slow toward his eyebrow. A shaking hand, the same small salute he had paid me, except now it had found the man it had been saving itself for all along. Then the young Marine by the window. He came to attention so hard the chair behind him skidded back and knocked the wall. Heels together, chin level, eyes front, every inch of him locked onto a line I could not see but he plainly could. And then it went through that whole room the way a current goes through water, the way I have watched one corrected figure pull a whole crooked column straight, once the first number finally drops into its place. The old man by the coffee machine that never works put a hand on the wall and pushed himself up onto his feet. A woman in nurse's scrubs stood. A boy who could not have been 20, a cane beside him and one trouser leg folded up and pinned, got himself up out of that hard plastic chair with both arms and would not let the man next to him lend a hand. They stood the way you stand in a church you have not set foot in for years, because some things run deeper than whether you still feel you have the right to be inside the door. They stood because the body remembers what the mouth has long since forgotten how to say. I stayed sitting. The flag was in my lap. I kept both hands on it. Behind the counter, Brenda Coyle stood up too. But she stood the way a person stands when she does not yet know what is happening, only that something is, and that it is far bigger than her desk, and that she had better be on her feet to meet it. She had a stack of manila folders gathered up in her arms. She held them against the front of her cardigan like a schoolgirl holds her books, and she put on the face she kept for inspections, the bright and ready face, the one already working out how to be useful to whoever turned out to be the one who mattered. She did not know yet. That is the piece of it I hold on to. For one more breath, she still believed this was a morning that could be managed. A man at the general's shoulder leaned in and said something low, and I caught only the tail of it. 2 words, and the 2 words were his name. Whitlock. General Whitlock. The name went into me sideways and stopped there. I had seen that name. I had written it out myself 3 weeks before in my own hand, copying it off a slip of paper covered in Raymond's uphill letters onto the front of a certified envelope, a town in Virginia printed underneath it that I had never once in our years heard my husband say out loud. I had paid the woman at the post office on Main Street $11.40 and sent it off to a stranger because a dying man had asked me to, and I had driven myself home certain down to my shoes that nothing on this earth would ever come of it. Now I sat in that folding chair with the flag in my lap, and I felt the floor of the whole morning shift underneath me. The way it shifts when a figure you were sure was nothing turns out to be the entire account. He did not go to the line. There were 9 people standing in that line, some of them waiting since before the doors were unlocked, and a 4-star general could have stopped at the head of it and taken one hand and said one kind word and made the next county paper, and not a soul would have thought a thing of it. He did not. He came past all of them, past the little stanchion rope, past the sign on its stand that told us to please wait to be called, and his boots were quiet on the linoleum, and he came the full length of that lobby in one straight, unbroken line, and the line ended at me. He stopped in front of my folding chair. This enormous man, the whole bright morning at his back, and the entire room up on its feet behind him, and he stopped in front of one seated gray-haired woman with a folded triangle of cloth in her lap, and he looked at the flag first. Not at me, at the flag. The way a man looks at a face he has known and grieved. Then he came down. Not all the way, but down, onto one bent knee, bringing those 4 stars down level with where I sat, so that I would not have to crane my neck up at him, so that the 2 of us were eye to eye. And I understood he had done it deliberately, that a man does not climb to where he stood without knowing, to the penny, what it costs a watching room to see him kneel. "Mrs. Boyd," he said. He took my hand. Not a handshake. He took it up in both of his, the very way Raymond used to take it on the edge of that bed in the front room, and his hands were warm and altogether steady, and up close his eyes were doing something the rest of his face was holding dead still, and he said it again, lower this time, only for me to hear. "Mrs. Boyd, I am sorry that I am late." I did not say one word. I have told you already. I do not get loud. There are moments a person waits her whole life to find the right words for, and then the moment finally arrives and takes the words clean out of her on its way through the door, and all that is left to do is keep your own face from breaking apart in front of a room full of strangers. I held his hands. I held the flag. I looked at this man I had never in my life met, who had crossed a whole room to kneel down on the floor in front of me, and I still did not know what he had been to my husband. I only knew that he had been something, that the slip of paper had told the truth, that the errand a dying man set me had reached, against all my expecting, the exact place it was sent. Behind the counter, Brenda Coyle had gone very still. I want you to understand what stillness looks like, sitting on a person who has something to lose. It is not calm. It is the precise opposite of calm, wearing calm's coat over its shoulders. She had worked it out a half beat behind the rest of the room, the same half beat she had spent behind the truth of my claim from the very start, and you could watch that bright, ready inspection face try to hold its place on the front of her and come apart instead, one small piece at a time. The folders were still clutched in her arms. Her knuckles had gone bloodless on them. She was staring at the back of that uniform, at the 4 stars, at the old woman he had knelt to the floor for, and you could watch her doing the arithmetic that I do for my living. The one sum in the world she had never once wanted to add up, and arriving at the same total no matter which way she tried to carry it. She was looking at the one file she had buried, and the file had walked in off Cedar Point Boulevard and stood up in her lobby with 4 silver stars on its shoulder. The general rose back to his full height, slow and unhurried, keeping my hand the whole way, so that I came up out of that folding chair along with him, the flag held against my chest. And he turned, and he kept me there close at his side, and he faced the counter. He did not raise his voice. Men who are truly obeyed almost never have any need to. "Who is the supervisor in this office?" he said. It was not a question, and every living soul in that room knew it was not a question. The young Marine by the window had not let a single muscle out of attention. The old man who had dropped his newspaper still had his hand up flat against his brow, and there were tears running plainly down into his collar, and he did not appear to know or to care in the least that they were there. Brenda Coyle's mouth came open. For 3 solid weeks that mouth had told me the system was erroring. For 3 weeks it had set its words down across the road in front of me like one wall after another. Received on the 3rd of March. No record of any file. The number will not pull. There is nothing I can do for you. I had stood at her counter and watched that mouth slide my husband's folded flag back across the laminate at me like a parcel that somebody upstairs had refused, and I had heard it say, loud enough to fill this very room, that no one here cared who my husband was. Now the room cared. Now the whole room was up on its feet, and her mouth came open, and what climbed out of it was a very small thing. That would be me, sir. The general did not answer her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a stain on something that used to be clean for a moment, and then not at all, and he turned his head a few degrees back toward the doors, and he said a single word. "Inspector." And a man I had not picked out of that group came forward. He was not military. He wore a plain gray suit and carried a soft leather folder tucked under one arm, and a laminated card hung on a lanyard at his chest, and he had the unmistakable look of a man who reads for his living, a little stooped, in no hurry, the sort of man I would hand a ledger to without a second thought. He came up to the counter, and he set that leather folder down flat on it, down on the same scuffed laminate where Brenda Coyle had pushed my husband's flag back at me 3 weeks before, and he opened it, and he took his good time about it, and the entire room watched his 2 hands move. "My name is Delgado," he said to her, not loud, only clear enough to carry to the walls. "Office of the Inspector General, Department of Veterans Affairs." 11 days ago, this office received a packet of certified copies in the mail. He turned one page over. "We have been reading your work ever since, Miss Coyle. I am going to read one document into this room now, out loud, and I am going to ask you to stand right where you are and listen to every word of it." Brenda Coyle did not move. The folders were still locked in her arms. She had nowhere left to set them down, and no hand free to stop the thing that was coming, and no stretch of road left in front of her to lay a single wall across. And Inspector Delgado smoothed the page flat under 2 fingers, the very way I smooth a page before I read it, and he drew a breath, and he began. What he read was a single sheet of federal paper, and he read it the way a man reads a thing he means to be remembered saying. "Notice of award, Department of Veterans Affairs, in the matter of the surviving spouse of Raymond Earl Boyd." He let my husband's full name stand in the quiet a moment before he carried on. Be advised that the claim for dependency and indemnity compensation has been adjudicated and approved. Monthly entitlement, $5,200, payable to Eleanor Boyd, effective the first of the month following the veteran's passing. Authorized by the regional director and entered into the federal record. Approved. I had held that one word inside my chest for 8 months as a thing I hoped for and would not let myself count. And here it sat being read off a government page in a dry and level voice to a room full of people I had never met. And it had been true the whole time I stood at that counter and was told otherwise. Not pending, not denied, not erroring inside a system that could never seem to locate its own files when an old woman asked it to. Approved and signed and filed, and resting 11 days now under this quiet man's reading glasses. While not 3 weeks gone, a clerk in this very office had slid Raymond's flag back across the laminate at me and told me to carry it on home. Inspector Delgado turned one more page. "This award is dated the 19th of March," he said. He did not lift his eyes to Brenda Coyle. He kept them down on the paper, which was somehow the worse of the two. "I have a second document in this folder. A notice of disallowance. It denies this same claim, the same widow, the same file number that, I am given to understand, would not pull up on the screen." He let that sit there a beat. "It carries a signature. I have had that signature examined by people who do such work for a living. It is authentic. Miss Coyle, you signed this denial with your own hand." Brenda Coyle's mouth moved, and nothing came of it. "What concerns my office," Delgado went on, "is the date set down beside your name. This denial claims to have been issued the 11th of February. 5 full weeks before the award it was written to Barry. A denial cannot lawfully come before the decision it overturns. So one of these two dates is false, and the paper itself will tell us which one." He drew out a third sheet, thin as onion skin, and laid it flat atop the others. "It all rests its weight on one stamp. The date this office records as the day Mr. Boyd's claim came in, printed here as the 30th of March. But the certified packet Mrs. Boyd mailed to us carries the post office's own cancellation and the receiving clerk's initials, and a date written under them. The 3rd of March, a 3 and a naught, turned end for end. One figure set down backward, and a Marine's widow is told she has filed too late to be heard. I had seen that already. I had stood at this same counter on my first morning, the flag still warm from the seat of my truck, and I had looked down at the stamp on my own copy, and I had said, quietly, the way I say such things, that the date was wrong, that we were received on the 3rd and not the 30th, that somebody had set the two figures down the wrong way around. And Brenda Coyle had given me the smile a person gives a confused old woman and told me the stamp was the stamp, and there was nothing to be done. I am not a loud woman. I never have been. 30 years I sat in a back office and balanced a school district's payroll down to the last penny, and not one time in all of it did I ever win a thing by getting big in my voice. I do not raise my voice. I get the date right. I had gotten this one right standing at that counter with not a soul on earth willing to hear me. And now a federal inspector had crossed a state line to lay the very same two numbers in front of the very same woman, and a whole room had risen out of its chairs to watch him do it. Brenda Coyle put the folders down at last. There was nothing else for her arms to do. They had simply quit holding, the way a thing gives out when it has carried too much for too long. And the manila stack slid onto the counter and fanned open, and one corner of it came to rest on the very spot where my husband's flag had been pushed back at me, and she did not move to pick it up. She looked at me, for the first time in 3 weeks of standing across that laminate, Brenda Coyle looked at me as though I were a person and not a slow morning's problem, and her face had gone the gray of old paper, and what climbed out of her was small and broken and plain. "The backlog got away from me," she said, "hardly more than breath, years ago. And then there were checks that came back, reissued funds, and there was no way left to set it right that did not show what I had already done. So I made the dates carry it." Nobody in that room answered her. There is a silence heavier than any amount of shouting, and she stood there inside it with no company at all. It was General Whitlock who moved next, and he did not move toward her. He turned the other way, and he reached into the breast of his coat, and he brought out an envelope. It was old. You could see that from where I stood. The paper had gone soft and furred at the corners, the way paper goes when a man has carried it folded against his chest a long while, and there was writing across the front of it, and even at that distance I knew the hand. I knew it the way you know a voice through a wall. It was Raymond's, the same uphill letters I had copied off a slip of paper at my own kitchen table and never once understood, and I understood now what it was I had mailed. This was the letter my husband had me send to a stranger in Virginia. It had come the whole way back into this room in the breast pocket of the most powerful soldier in the country, and he held it up so the entire lobby could see the writing on its face. "Mr. Boyd addressed this to the boy from the ridge," General Whitlock said, and for the first time that morning his steady voice was not entirely steady. "I have had it 11 days. I have not once been able to set it down." He turned it so the room could see the words my husband had set down for a man he had not laid eyes on in 40 years. To the boy from the ridge. 40 years back, he said, and he spoke now to all of them, to the standing veterans and the nurse and the boy with the pinned trouser leg and the old man with the wet face who had let his salute fall at last. 40 years back, a vehicle I was riding in came apart on a ridge in a country I will not name to you, and it caught fire with me pinned inside it, and I could not get myself clear. I was 19 years old. A sergeant I had known 6 weeks came back through that fire on his own 2 feet and carried me out of it on his back, and he was burned for the trouble. And in 40 years, he never once let me thank him the way I wanted to. He told me to go and live a life worth the carrying. That sergeant was Raymond Boyd. The boy with the cane made a sound. I did not turn. I could not have looked at anything in that moment but the envelope. "There is a medal for what that man did," the general said. "He wore it twice and then put it away in a drawer. The one thing he ever asked of me, the single thing in 40 years, he asked from his deathbed, in the letter I am holding in my hand. He asked me to see that his wife was provided for once he was gone, because he knew. He knew the way that man knew everything, that they would fight her on it. He mailed it himself. And when it reached my office 11 days ago, with her certified copies folded in beside it, I made 2 telephone calls. The first was to the Inspector General of this department. The second was to tell my driver we were going to North Carolina. That was the curb full of black trucks. That was the whole of it, start to finish. Not a coincidence, and not a miracle, and not the county getting itself lucky in next week's paper. A dying man had done his sums the way I do mine at a desk, had seen the shape of the thing coming for me down the road, and had set one quiet figure into the account years ahead of when it would be needed, and that figure had risen up off its deathbed letter and walked into this office on 4 silver stars and stood the whole room out of its chairs. Inspector Delgado closed his leather folder. He looked toward the doors, and 2 of the people who had come in behind the general were no longer standing by the glass. They had come up quiet along the wall while the rest of us were turned toward Raymond's hand on that envelope. and they stood now at either side of the supervisor's desk, and one of them said Brenda Coyle's name and then the words administrative leave, and asked her to step back from the computer and to enter nothing further into it. She did not argue. She lifted her hands off the keys as if they had gone hot under her fingers, and she came around the end of her own counter, and they walked her out through her own lobby, past every veteran she had ever made sit and wait, and not one of them said a single word to her as she went, and that was its own kind of sentence handed down. A younger woman in a plain blouse took the chair Brenda Coyle had left empty. Delgado set a page down in front of her and put one finger on a line and said, loud enough to reach the walls, "We will begin with Mr. Boyd. Enter the claim received the 3rd of March. Pay it retroactive to the date of death, every month owed." Then he straightened, and he looked down the length of that waiting line, at the 9 souls still standing between the rope and the door, and he said, "And then this office is going to call every one of you to this counter today, by your name, and a man from my office is going to sit down in the chair beside you while it is done. Nobody is leaving here with their papers pushed back across the desk at them. Not this morning." The boy with the cane sat down then. He just sat, all at once, both hands come up over his face, and the nurse folded her arm around his shoulders, and the old man who had dropped his newspaper bent and gathered it up off the linoleum and tucked it under his arm and stood the way a man stands at a graveside straight, because standing straight was the last thing left that he knew how to give. General Whitlock came back to me. He did not kneel this time. He stood, and he put out both his hands, and I understood that he was asking, and I gave him the flag. He took it the way a man takes a thing that was only ever on loan to him, and he looked down at the tight blue field of it with the white stars folded into the heart of the triangle, and then he laid it back into my arms, and he brought his hand up slow and held the salute on that folded cloth far longer than any regulation asks of a man. He was not saluting me. He was saluting the one folded inside it. Then he bent down close and said, "Only for me. He provided for you the whole way along, Mrs. Boyd. He told me to be sure you knew it, and he stepped back and let me be. There was a second letter. Raymond left that one for me, and he mailed it nowhere. He had worked it down into the last fold of that flag before the burial detail ever set it in my hands, where the cloth tucks under itself and holds fast, and I had felt the stiffness of it there from the very first day, and known his hand was on a page inside, and I had not once been able to make myself draw it out. 8 months I carried him folded in my arms with his last words to me sealed an inch from my own fingers, and I left them sealed, because as long as the page stayed shut, he was still partway in the room with me, still holding one last thing back to say. I did not need to open it to know what it said, that I had been provided for and loved the whole way along. I drove the length of Highway 24 home that evening with the windows down, and the marsh came up off the Sound the way it does at dusk, green and low and old. I went up onto my own porch there in Swansboro, and I sat myself down in Raymond's chair instead of my own, with the flag home at last and standing in its case beside me. For 8 months I had held the whole of it up alone, the claim and the flag and the grief, and the being the only one left who still remembered. There on the porch I set it down. I stopped holding it up. I laid the letter in my lap and left it sealed. Out past the porch rail, the last light slid off the water,